So you think you're smart? Then translate it. That's what the billionaire barked across the marble floor, expecting laughter, not Mandarin, expecting obedience, not consequences. But what Richard Blackwood didn't know, what most people miss, is that every time you underestimate someone, you hand them the matchstick. And when the whole room is made of dry paper and lies, all it takes is one spark to set the empire on fire. You want to know how a cleaning lady burned Wall Street's golden boy to the ground using nothing but language and silence? Good. Because by the end of this, you won't just know the story. You'll know exactly how she did it, and why you'll never look at the invisible people the same way again. And while you're here, do yourself a favor. Hit that like button if you've ever seen someone turn the tables with quiet power. Drop a comment if you felt underestimated too, because you're not alone. And subscribe, because this story, it only gets better from here. It started with a rag, a Rolex, and a room full of men who thought cruelty was comedy. Camila Santos, 34, stood at the edge of the conference room, wiping a glass table so clean it looked like absence. Her cleaning cloth dripped quietly onto the marble like a ticking clock. Across from her, Richard Blackwood smirked as if God had handed him a microphone. So you think you're smart? Prove it by translating this contract into Mandarin for all of us. Laughter exploded behind him, 15 executives circling like hyenas, already recording on their phones, hungry for a clip they could trade like currency. But Camila didn't flinch. Her hands moved slower, not faster. Her back stayed straight, her eyes didn't blink. She didn't smile, but she didn't crumble either, because this wasn't new. This moment was just a repeat of an older insult, a recycled arrogance with a new name and a bigger room. What none of them knew, not Richard, not Marcus, not the grinning CFO filming from the corner, was that 2 years ago, Camila was standing in front of a very different room. A Harvard lecture hall, applied linguistics, legal translation, magna cum laude, 7 languages spoken fluently, 3 published papers before she turned 30, ambassadorships waiting in her inbox. Her future had a velvet rope and VIP access. She didn't clean up after executives, they cleaned up after her until one man panicked. Marcus Blackwood, a plagiarist in a professor's clothing. When he realized she had proof he'd stolen her thesis work, he flipped the script faster than a magician with a bad conscience. One meeting later, she was accused of academic fraud. One signature later, her career evaporated. Just like that, she went from keynote to cautionary tale. And Marcus? Promoted. Director of International Development at his father's empire. The man who stole her life's work, now hired bilinguals he couldn't spell without autocorrect. Diversity has its limits, doesn't it? Marcus had told the faculty board that day. Camila never forgot that. Not the smirk, not the smell of the room, not the silence from people who claimed to be allies. It wasn't just a career he took, it was a reputation, a name, her passport into the world she'd earned. And with nowhere else to go, Camila did what people like her are always forced to do. She made herself small. She folded brilliance into quiet. Took a job wiping the same windows she used to gaze through. She wore gloves so her fingerprints wouldn't linger anywhere they weren't invited. But while they laughed, she learned. Every meeting she cleaned up after, every document they left behind, she read it, memorized it, translated it. Sometimes in Mandarin, sometimes in Russian, sometimes in the quiet rage of a woman counting the days until it was her turn to speak. And now here they were, Richard Blackwood adjusting his watch, mistaking platinum for power, executives leaning back in chairs they hadn't earned, mocking the woman who saw everything they tried to hide. Take your time, Richard chuckled. I know it must be hard for people like you to understand complex documents. One laughed so hard he spilled coffee on his tie. Another elbowed his colleague like they were at a comedy club. Sarah from HR, the woman who talked about inclusion on LinkedIn, smiled like the punchline had been hers to deliver, and the whole time, Camila just stood there, cleaning cloth in hand, heart in stillness, not angry, not afraid, just ready, because power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it lets fools write their own endings in invisible ink, and when the truth finally reveals itself, it reads like prophecy. Camilla didn't speak. Not yet. Her silence was louder than their taunts. She looked at Richard, then at Marcus, and then at the contract. Slowly, she took it from his hands. A deliberate movement, almost like a prayer. She skimmed the first page, then the next. Not with panic, with fluency, with muscle memory. And still she said nothing, because the most dangerous person in the room is the one who can weaponize your arrogance against you. Richard leaned forward, expecting a mistake, a stammer, maybe tears. But instead, Camilla gave him the same thing the world had given her. Nothing. And in that silence, something shifted. The laughter didn't echo as long. The smirks tightened. Even the CFO lowered his phone. Here's the thing they didn't understand. When you spend your life being dismissed, you learn how to make your moment count. Camilla wasn't playing checkers. She wasn't even playing chess. She was memorizing the rulebook, translating it into 7 languages, and waiting for the day they'd need her to read it back to them. Out loud, in public, without mercy. This wasn't the beginning of her humiliation. This was the end of theirs. And the only question left was, would any of them realize it before she lit the match? If this story is already turning something in your gut, if you've ever been laughed at, underestimated, or erased, don't just listen. Share it. Hit like to let the world know you see what others overlook. Subscribe so you never miss a moment where justice surprises power. And tell us in the comments, what did they get wrong about you that you're still planning to prove right? For 2 years, Camilla walked among thieves with a mop in one hand and their secrets in the other. The executives thought she was just cleaning tables, but she was reading every contract, every memo, every carelessly discarded document they left behind like breadcrumbs from a criminal feast. They thought her silence meant she didn't understand. What it really meant was that she understood too well. In those 730 days, she absorbed more corporate malpractice than most whistleblowers catch in a lifetime. She didn't need a badge or a degree pinned to her blazer. She had memory. She had motive. And most of all, she had time. Because what they didn't see, what they never see, is that power built on ego always forgets to lock the door behind it. Language was her weapon, her armor, her map. To them, Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, and Japanese were exotic puzzles no janitor could crack. To Camilla, they were keys. Each syllable unlocking a vault of lies the company thought was safely buried under bureaucracy. She learned to spot laundering in Russian the way some people spot typos in English. She didn't just translate words, she translated intent. She saw through the pretty phrases and pinpointed the poison. Clause by clause, footnote by footnote, she stitched together a tapestry of betrayal, cross-bender shell companies, ghost subsidiaries, and phantom investments. Her knowledge didn't come from access granted. It came from arrogance exposed. Every paper left on a desk was another confession. Every email printed and trashed was another leak in their dam. And Camilla? She was just standing there, cup in hand, waiting for the flood. The crimes were almost cartoonish in their boldness. Blackwood Industries had inflated invoices to make fake projects look like gold mines. They reported revenues from companies that didn't exist. They wired millions into bank accounts registered to dead consultants and fake trade names. And through it all, they used complex, multilingual contracts as a smokescreen, assuming no regulator, no journalist, and certainly no cleaning lady could piece it together. But Camilla did. She cataloged everything, printed duplicates, photographed signatures, created a private digital library of deception. One contract, signed in Hong Kong under Louis Holdings, mentioned a backdoor clause allowing seizure of American assets if financial inconsistencies were found. Another document, this time in Arabic, referenced shadow funding routed through fake educational partnerships. Camilla didn't just see fraud, she saw how far they'd gone to hide it, and just how close they were to falling off the edge. And then, of course, there was Marcus, the man who destroyed her future so he could preserve his own. Camila never forgot the paper he published, the one that won him awards and launched his career as a thought leader in cross-linguistic legal systems. It read like her master's thesis, but stripped of soul. It had her sentence structures, her research examples, even her obscure footnotes about the history of loanword adoption in contract law, and he had the audacity to add a dedication to future scholars from underrepresented backgrounds. Camila had memorized every word, not out of bitterness, but because it reminded her that his entire empire, like his father's, was built on stolen work. "That research you published," she would one day say, "you didn't even know that syntax existed until I mapped it out for you." That wasn't just payback. That was prophecy in the making, a promise stitched in every sleepless night she spent analyzing his fraud in 4 languages. Her silence wasn't passive. It was strategic. Like tectonic plates grinding quietly beneath a glittering city, Camila's resolve was growing more dangerous by the day. Each time she was mocked for wiping down a desk, she mentally noted which executive left behind the latest quarterly report. Each joke about her accent sharpened her recall of the dummy corporations named in those reports. Each time someone laughed at her expense, they unwittingly funded the campaign of their own downfall. She didn't need to scream. She needed receipts. And soon, she'd have them all. Because the truth about power is, it leaks. It leaves fingerprints on paper. It forgets to delete the draft. And the ones who are forced to watch from the margins, they see everything, especially when no one's watching them back. Meanwhile, the laughter never stopped. The same executives who cheered when Richard humiliated her continued their parade of arrogance. Marcus began leaving her notes written in Russian, sarcastic taunts meant to humiliate. "Translate this, superstar." She did. Every one. They thought they were reminding her of her place, but really they were building her case. Line by line, insult by insult. They armed her with more proof. Sarah from HR assigned her extra work. Longer shifts, extra rooms. Camila welcomed it. More hours meant more access. James from accounting joked about bilingual janitors, unaware that Camila had already cataloged the discrepancy in his off-book bonuses. They thought they were adding weight to her back. Instead, they were sharpening the axe she'd soon swing. And that's the part that should terrify anyone who's ever dismissed someone in silence. You don't know what they're carrying. You don't know what they've seen. Camila didn't fight fire with fire. She studied the blueprints, located the gas line, and waited until the whole house reeked of matches. If you've ever been overlooked, this is your blueprint too. If they're too arrogant to see your value, let them give you access instead. Use your silence not to suffer, but to listen, to learn, to record. Because justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it translates. And sometimes it mops the floor under your feet while you talk too loud. If this part of Camila's journey lit something inside you, something stubborn, something simmering, then don't let it die there. Hit like if you've ever felt underestimated. Share this with someone who's been told to know their place, and drop a comment if you've ever held your tongue while building your case. Subscribe to stay with us, because the next move in Camila's quiet rebellion is about to flip the entire board. There's a kind of silence that doesn't ask for attention. It commands it. When Camila took the contract from Richard Blackwood's hand, the room didn't laugh. They froze. She didn't glance around for permission. She didn't clear her throat or ask for a moment to prepare. She just scanned the first few pages with eyes that moved like they'd seen these words before, and they had. And then, like thunder cracking over glass, she spoke, not in English, not in Portuguese, but in crisp, flawless Mandarin. Every syllable struck the marble hall like a bell tolling for the living. Genju he tong dc shi tiao ti tiao. The executives blinked. Phones slowly lowered. Jaws slackened. One man coughed and pretended not to flinch. But Camila didn't look up. She just kept reading, translating legal clauses that none of them understood, in a language they swore was beyond her. Except now, That lie was unraveling in real time, and the only sound in the room was the echo of their own ignorance. The smirks vanished like fog under sun. Sarah from HR, who once made jokes about Camilla's cute accent, dropped her pen. James Mitchell, the CFO, slowly slid his iPhone face down on the table. Even Marcus, who had strutted in like he owned the air, sat back so abruptly his chair let out a screech. Because this wasn't just fluency, it was authority. Camilla didn't sound like someone guessing her way through a translation app. She sounded like the author of the contract itself. And it got worse, or better depending on who you were rooting for. After 20 seconds of Mandarin, she switched to Portuguese, but her tone was unchanged. Sharp, elegant, surgical. This contract, she explained, establishes a joint venture between Blackwood Industries and Louis Holdings. Clause 47 states that if any financial irregularities are discovered in a U.S.-based subsidiary, the Chinese partner has the legal right to assume controlling interest. Gasps aren't always audible, but this one was, because no one, not even the legal department, had mentioned Clause 47. That clause was buried deep, on page 187 of a 200-page document written in technical language so dense it might as well have been encrypted. But Camilla had found it, underlined it, memorized it, and now, as she calmly recited it aloud, Richard Blackwood's face turned a shade of gray reserved for tombstones and tax audit. Interesting placement, Camilla continued, flipping pages with deliberate care. Tucked between indemnification schedules and asset reallocation triggers, almost like you hoped no one would notice. She looked up, then, finally, and met Richard's eyes. But I did. She didn't stop. She couldn't. Because buried beneath those pages were more than just numbers. They were footprints. Tracks in the snow of deceit. According to internal memos I found during cleaning shifts, she said, voice steady, these irregularities already exist. Inflated revenue reports, phantom companies, deliberate misrepresentation of investor capital flows. Her words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They dropped like stones into the room's glass pond, each one breaking the surface a little more. Truth, she said, has a strange habit of hiding in plain sight, like bones under a garden you water every day. A metaphor that made James, the CFO, shift in his chair, because he knew what that meant. They all did. This wasn't a threat. This was a mirror, and Camilla was holding it steady, forcing every executive to see what they had ignored. Marcus tried to recover, to wrest control back with the one weapon he had always relied on: arrogance. Let's be honest, he said, standing up, waving his hand like he was scolding a misinformed intern. This is dramatic, but misleading. Ms. Santos is not a certified interpreter, nor a legal expert. He paused, as if the word cleaning lady suddenly felt like the trigger it was. She's clearly misunderstood the nature of these documents. Camilla didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply turned toward the projection screen, pressed a button on her phone, and up came two versions of the same document. One signed, one not. One reporting $80 million, 0 cents in revenue from the Hong Kong branch. The other, a private copy from the company's own server logs. $31 million, 0 cents. I misunderstood. Nothing, she said. But you, Marcus, you misunderstood the risk of leaving the truth where I could reach it. And with that, she held up the original Mandarin clause again, side by side with the manipulated English version Marcus had edited before sending it to the... Richard didn't speak. He couldn't. His lips parted like he was going to say something, anything, but no sound came. The man who once barked at her like she was gum stuck to his shoe now stared at the floor like a student caught cheating mid-exam. I believe the phrase you used earlier was, "So you think you're smart?" Camilla said, her tone almost gentle. Well, I never said I was. I just read the fine print, and that was the irony that burned most. The man who mocked her intelligence now found himself mute, suffocated by a contract he'd never bothered to read, in a language he thought no one in the room could understand. Let that sit with you. The same people who laughed at her accent, who rolled their eyes at her presence, who saw her as decoration or background noise, those people now hung on her every word. Because once again, Camila hadn't screamed or shouted or demanded anything. She just showed up, with facts, with fluency, with truth too sharp to deny. And that is the real lesson here. Don't waste energy proving your worth to people who mistake your silence for ignorance. Let them speak, let them mock, then, when the time comes, translate their failure back to them, clearly, calmly, and in perfect form. Have you felt something shift in you during this part? Something righteous? Something ready? Don't let it fade. Like this story if you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought power came with a title. Comment if you've ever stayed quiet long enough to make the final word count. And subscribe, because the next move, it's not just bold, it's irreversible. Camila hasn't just broken their silence, she's about to burn their safety net. And you won't want to miss what comes next. David Chun didn't stand out at first. Not in the chaos of Blackwood Industries, where noise was currency and arrogance was perfume, but Camila noticed him for the one thing that had gone extinct in that marble palace: kindness. He didn't stare when she passed. He didn't chuckle when Richard made comments. One morning, as she straightened a stack of papers on his desk, David looked up from his screen and said, "You speak Mandarin." The question landed softly, but Camila felt her spine straighten. She nodded, cautiously. "My grandmother was born in Guangzhou," he added. "She used to say the language holds memory better than people do." For a moment, Camila didn't feel like the cleaner. She felt seen. Not as a curiosity, but as someone who held something powerful. In that moment she knew he wasn't just another suit. He was listening. Their friendship was slow, deliberate, like planting seeds in poisoned soil. Over shared early mornings and quiet coffee offers, Camila and David began exchanging fragments of truth. She spoke in metaphor. He replied with data. He revealed his growing discomfort with financial reports that didn't match. "Every quarter I audit the numbers from Hong Kong," he whispered. "But what I see on paper doesn't match the contracts I get." Camila responded with a translated line from one of those very documents, word for word. He froze. "How did you know that?" She smiled, but didn't answer. "Because some things you don't say, you show." That's when David realized he wasn't alone. His suspicions weren't paranoia. Camila had been collecting the other half of the puzzle all along. While he chased numbers on spreadsheets, she tracked the lies written in 4 languages and tucked inside recycling bins. Together, their silent investigations started to sync, like 2 clocks in separate rooms that suddenly ticked in rhythm. But Marcus noticed the shift. Not the friendship, he was too self-absorbed for that, but the fact that Camila no longer avoided eye contact. So, he upped his cruelty. Instead of ignoring her, he began leaving foreign language contracts on her cleaning cart, always with a snide note. "Since you're so talented, maybe you can explain this to your people." Camila didn't react, not outwardly. But every taunt became another data point. She translated each document, not just literally, but contextually. One Arabic contract detailed a shell company in Qatar used to filter investment dollars through fake education grants. Another Russian file revealed a subsidiary with no employees billing 6 figures monthly for consulting. Camila documented everything. The joke was on Marcus. He thought he was insulting her, but all he'd done was hand her the smoking gun in 6 dialects. The humiliation he tried to inflict became the evidence she needed to destroy him. One morning, David handed her a flash drive. It was small, nondescript, something most would overlook, but his hands trembled as he gave it to her. "It's everything," he said. "Original spreadsheets, unedited financial statements, metadata logs from the internal server before Richard revised them." Camila held it like it was radioactive, because, in a way, it was. "You kept backups?" she asked. David nodded, eyes tired. "I knew one day it would matter. I just hoped it wouldn't be me who had to use them." He looked up then, voice barely above a whisper. "If they find out, I'm finished." Camila didn't blink. "They won't." That flash drive was more than data. It was the spine of a ghost no one could kill. Proof that Blackwood Industries had built its empire on a graveyard of lies, and that someone inside had watched it happen long before she came along. That night, Camilla sat in her apartment, surrounded by folders, contracts, photos, and the glow of her laptop. She opened a notebook labeled The Plan, Phase 1, Evidence. It was nearly complete. Every document catalogued, translated, matched to financial records and internal emails. Phase 2, Exposure. She had contacts, professors from Harvard, an old friend now working as a journalist at a national financial paper, a cousin who interned with the SEC. She began drafting letters. Anonymous tips, yes, but also strategic invitations. She didn't want a scandal. She wanted a collapse. Phase 3, Execution. That one required timing. She circled a date in her planner. The day Louis Holdings was scheduled to finalize a $500 million 0-cent investment. She'd volunteer to help organize the event. That's when they'd be vulnerable. When they'd all be in the same room, when truth, written in perfect Mandarin, would walk in dressed as a cleaner and walk out owning the room. You see, this wasn't about revenge. It never was. Revenge burns hot but fast. Camilla wanted justice, the kind that leaves behind a different world, and that's what makes her dangerous. She wasn't looking to humiliate, she was looking to rebuild, to replace corruption with truth, to use the very documents they left behind to write a new future, one where women like her didn't have to play small to survive, one where speaking 7 languages wasn't exotic, but expected, and one where no man could plagiarize your life and still look you in the eye. So ask yourself, what would you do if you were her? If you had the receipts, the resolve, and the righteous fire to flip the script? Would you play it safe? Or would you wait for the perfect day, the perfect room, the perfect word, and light the whole thing up? If this chapter fired you up, if it made you look at silence differently, then hit like, share it with someone who's quietly building their case, and subscribe, because Camilla's plan isn't theory anymore, it's already moving. And the next phase, it's going to rewrite everything. Camilla walked into Linda's office with a mop in one hand and a smile in the other. "I'd like to volunteer to help with the Louis Holdings event next week," she said calmly. The secretary nearly choked on her coffee. "You want to work extra?" Linda blinked, genuinely confused, as if the idea of Camilla willingly stepping into a room full of executives didn't compute. Camilla shrugged with studied humility. "I could use the money, and I figured you could use help setting up for the international guests." An awkward silence stretched. Then Linda chuckled under her breath. She couldn't wait to pass this request along. Richard Blackwood approved it instantly. "Let her work the floor," he laughed. "It'll be entertaining to see how she acts around real Chinese executives. Maybe she'll try to impress them with her little YouTube Mandarin again." What he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that Camilla had already exchanged 5 emails with Mr. Louis, the CEO of Louis Holdings, and none of them had come from a cleaning lady. In those emails, written in sophisticated business Mandarin, Camilla had identified herself as an independent compliance consultant. She expressed concern about financial irregularities in the upcoming joint venture, outlined the nature of the discrepancies, and attached translated samples of internal documents she had gathered from 2 years of quiet surveillance. Louis had responded within 24 hours. Not only was he intrigued, he was alarmed. They scheduled a call. Then another. He requested more information. Camilla delivered. Over the course of 2 weeks, she fed him details in Mandarin so precise and technically flawless, his legal team in Beijing began preparing contingency strategies. On the surface, she was mopping floors and folding napkins. In the background, she was restructuring the terms of a deal that Richard believed he'd already closed. The brilliance of it all? Richard invited her into the room, thinking he was staging a final humiliation. But Camilla had turned it into an ambush. She wasn't crashing the party. She was hosting it. The Crystal Hall had never looked more expensive or more fragile. Golden chandeliers sparkled above as executives in navy suits filled the long conference table. At the head, Richard Blackwood stood beaming, slides prepared, numbers polished. Our growth in the Asian market has been exponential, he declared confidently, gesturing at inflated charts. And our partnership with Louis Holdings will mark a new chapter in global innovation. Across the table, Monsieur Louis nodded respectfully, his face unreadable. Camilla moved quietly, pouring tea, adjusting chairs, ignored by most. Marcus gave her a smirk as she passed, leaning toward his father. Let's see if she remembers to stay quiet this time. But Camilla didn't hear him. She was listening to the rhythm of the room, the way confidence thudded against tension, the way lies tried to dress up as facts. She noticed David slip into the back of the hall, carrying a small box of documents. The final piece was in place. Then Mr. Louis stood up. No one expected it. Not this soon. Not like this. He looked directly at Camilla, bypassing Richard, bypassing protocol. Miss Santos, he said, in Mandarin, clear and direct. Please explain the discrepancies you identified in the Hong Kong revenue reports. The entire room fell into stunned silence. Richard turned pale. Marcus dropped his pen. Camilla, without hesitation, straightened her posture and walked to the front of the room. As discussed in our previous communications, she began in Mandarin. I've uncovered 12 major irregularities, including falsified statements, undeclared shell subsidiaries, and internal emails confirming intentional data manipulation. The air thickened. Richard stammered. She doesn't have the authority, but Mr. Louis held up a hand. Silence. The word rang like a verdict. Camilla pressed a button. The projector screen flipped from Richard's pie charts to her slides. 2 versions of the same document appeared, one doctored for investors, one pulled from internal archives. The actual revenue last quarter from Hong Kong, she said, was not $80 million 0 cents. It was $31,200,000 0 cents. The next slide showed an Arabic contract routing money through a fake Middle East consultancy. Then a Russian agreement linking Marcus to academic fraud designed to lend legitimacy to the laundering. These documents were left unshredded. Careless but convenient, Camilla said with quiet sharpness. I translated them, because you assumed no one here could. Then, from her pocket, she pulled a small device and pressed play. Richard's voice echoed through the speakers. The Chinese are meticulous. If they catch any irregularities, this deal dies. We need to tweak the numbers before the final presentation. Richard lunged forward. That was taken out of context. But his words evaporated as David Chun stepped up with a sealed folder. The audit Ms. Santos requested is complete, he said. These are the original reports. And my resignation letter is included. Marcus stood. You traitor! But Camilla's voice sliced through the chaos. No, Marcus. He just stopped being silent. Then she looked at Mr. Louis. Would you like to proceed with your conclusion? Mr. Louis turned to his assistant, who began snapping photos of every projected slide and printed document. We have a strict policy against fraud. Ms. Santos, on behalf of Louis Holdings, we'd like to offer you a position as compliance director for our U.S. operations. Camilla nodded. I accept. She paused. But first, one final note. She turned to Richard and Marcus. You spent years mocking me because of my accent, my skin, my job title, but every insult you made was another door you forgot to lock. You handed me access because you believed I couldn't read the language you used to cover your tracks, but here we are. I read every word. I understood every number. And now, so do they. Just then, the doors opened. 2 federal agents walked in. Richard and Marcus Blackwood, one announced. You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud international investors. The clicks of handcuffs echoed like punctuation marks in a story they never thought would be told. This is what justice sounds like when it's fluent in more than rage. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It shows up with documentation, speaks in every language they try to use against you, and waits patiently while their empire collapses under the weight of its own arrogance. Camilla didn't take power. She revealed it. She didn't demand a seat at the table. She owned the table. If this chapter gave you chills, if it made you remember the power of staying ready, then hit that like button, share it with someone who's been underestimated, and subscribe, because while the Blackwoods fall, Camilla's rise isn't finished. The next chapter? It's not revenge, it's revolution. 6 months after the scandal that toppled Blackwood Industries, the gold-plated logo outside the glass tower in Midtown had been replaced by 3 simple words: Santos Louis International Holdings. And at the top of that tower, on the 40th floor, Camilla Santos stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, dressed in a hot couture blazer tailored not for show, but for war rooms and reform. The woman who used to mop the marble now walked it like a queen without needing a crown. Her name was etched into glass walls, stapled to contracts, whispered in global boardrooms with a new kind of respect, the kind that isn't handed to you but built with your bare hands out of rubble and grit. Under her leadership, the company hadn't just survived the implosion, it had risen like a skyscraper rebuilt on bedrock, not illusion. Quarterly growth had shattered records. Chinese investment had swelled to $800 million, 0 cents. And the audits? Clean. Unbreakably clean. But Camilla didn't celebrate in boardrooms. She celebrated on sidewalks. She returned to her old neighborhood not with cameras or champagne, but with blueprints. She walked the streets where she used to carry groceries for neighbors and whispered dreams to herself. And on the corner where a pawn shop once stood, she cut the ribbon on the Santos Educational Center, a 3-building complex offering free language, technology, and job readiness courses to underserved communities. "We're not teaching grammar," she told the opening crowd of 200. "We're teaching fluency in power." She called it bridgework, turning broken words into bridges across generational divides. And when one young boy asked if she spoke CEO, she laughed and answered, "I speak survival, sweetheart. And yes, that's fluent enough." Every wall in that building echoed a quiet promise. No one who learns here will ever have to pretend they don't understand again. Then one evening, as Camilla signed off on expansion plans to open 2 more centers in Atlanta and Detroit, her phone rang, an unknown number from Arizona. The prison. She let it ring 4 times before answering. "Camilla," the voice rasped. "It's Richard." For a second, she said nothing, just listened to the silence behind his voice, the sound of walls closing in. "I wanted to say, you were right, about everything. I see it now. I'm sorry I ever doubted you. Sorry I looked at you the way I did." She closed her eyes, not in pain, but in stillness. "You didn't doubt me, Richard," she said quietly. "You despised me. There's a difference." He swallowed hard. "My family's gone, my friends. They vanished the day the headlines hit, 'You've won.'" But Camilla shook her head. "No," she said. "I didn't win. I rose. That's what you never understood. I didn't climb to beat you. I climbed because people like me are always expected to stay on the ground. But I wasn't made for ceilings. I was made to break them." In the months that followed, her inbox turned into a battlefield of opportunities. An offer from the United Nations to lead global compliance reform, a request from the White House to join an ethics advisory panel. A venture fund wanted her to run a startup accelerator for women of color. But Camilla chose something quieter. She launched her own international consultancy focused on transparent language and equitable contract law, designed to protect the very communities companies often ignore. She didn't chase headlines. She built lighthouses, because for her, power wasn't about recognition, it was about protection. She turned down 7-figure salaries in favor of staying visible to those who needed her most. "I'd rather be a blueprint than a brand," she said once during a keynote. Because blueprints get copied, brands get bought. And when a young reporter from Forbes asked her the secret to revenge, she smiled slowly and gave her final quote. "The best revenge isn't destroying the people who tried to erase you," she said. "It's building something so high, so rooted, so indestructible, that they realize they were never capable of reaching it. That's not payback, that's legacy." The reporter wrote it down, but the audience didn't need it printed. They'd already felt it. Because Camilla wasn't a story you read. She was a blueprint you remembered. If her journey moved something inside you, If you saw pieces of yourself in her fire, her restraint, her quiet vengeance, then don't just sit with it, do something. Share this story with someone who's still mopping metaphorical floors while holding genius in their hands. Like this if you believe justice isn't about erasing enemies, but elevating truth. And subscribe, because Camilla's story may have ended in headlines, but yours is just getting started.